The week of Action for Peace and Climate Justice is to draw attention to the extremely strong links between war and militarization on the one hand, and climate change, climate catastrophe on the other hand. And we've seen quite a lot of reports coming out just in the past month that link these two. Um, there has been a new briefing by Scientists for Global Responsibility, which found that reviewing 11 other studies on the topic, that it made an estimate that every £100 billion of increased military expenditure will lead to 32 million tons of CO2 emissions equivalent per year. Um, there's also been a report by Tipping Point North South on the extraordinary climate damage and the need for climate reparations as a result of the Israeli genocide in Gaza. Um, there has been a report by the UN Secretary General on the impact of increasing military spending on the Sustainable Development Goals. I am putting all these reports in the chat, and it's quite a hard-hitting report showing that in all sorts of ways, climate and all sorts of other ways, increasing military spending is likely to cause an awful lot of harm to the prospects of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And finally, for those of you who read German, a publication by Greenpeace Germany on climate change, migration, and conflict. So for the context to this meeting, as the need for urgent action on climate change becomes ever more apparent, the world is hurtling in the opposite direction by massively increased spending on war and preparation for war, as well as on actual prosecution of war and genocide, one of the most climate destructive activities possible. And this, well, seems to be an extraordinary contradiction. People say they can't hear. Can you still not hear?
It's
Yes,
okay.
it's getting better.
Right.
It's a bit
How
better
about
if you
now?
stay
Okay.
close.
I
Yeah.
just need to make sure I am speaking towards the microphone.
Yes.
So to address these contradictions and how perhaps we can address them, we have an excellent panel of speakers from a diverse group of organizations. We have Laëtitia Sédou from the European Network Against the Arms Trade, Emilie Tricarico from the European Environmental Bureau, Olivier Petitjean from the Observatoire des Multinationales, and Anna Penfrat from Nonviolent Peaceforce. I'll say more about each of them as it's their turn to speak. And after that, we should have a fair amount of time for general discussion and debate, as there's quite a lot of people in the meeting. Please put your hands up using the Zoom function, the Zoom React hands up function, and I will try to call you all. I will try to call you all as much as is possible. If you just put your hands up on physically on screen, I might not see it, as there's only 25 on the screen at any one time. Without further ado, I will pass on to our first speaker. Laëtitia Sédou has been working as a project manager for European Network Against the Arms Trade since 2016. She monitors and raises awareness about how the militarization of the EU is heavily influenced by and benefits the arms industry, and how this exacerbates the global arms race. Before joining ENAAT, Laëtitia gained extensive experience in EU-level advocacy on human rights and democracy issues. So with that, Laëtitia, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Sam, and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for joining this event. Of course, as you are probably aware, most of the European rearmament actually happens at national level. If you consider the level of military spending and who acquires weapons, it's at national level. So why a specific focus on the EU level is still important? First, because I think it's very illustrative of the general trend which is currently affecting Europe. And second, of course, because the EU is also a major push factor today for this rearmament and militarization. Just think of these 150 billion loans that the European Commission is going to provide to member states in the coming months. So that's a huge amount of money for rearmament, of course. However, this EU militarization, that we can call it that way, started way before the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine. The first concrete outcomes that date back from 2017, as many of those who follow us would know. That's when the EU started to use the EU common pot. This was really a breakthrough to support joint armament projects. It started with research and development, and then it expanded to production, to joint production, and to joint acquisition. So to a certain extent, the Russian invasion has been a perfect argument and justification, sometimes post-justification, to expand in scope ideas that were already in the air. But also today, we can see it is also a huge expansion in scale. Currently, the amount of money dedicated to the arms industry are not that big. It's something about 12 billion so far in the last 7 years, in those current 7 years. Of course, not big compared with national military spending and compared with what is the global EU budget. But what is on the table for the next 7 years to come is much more worrying. The next budgetary cycle will start in 2034, and the Commission has put proposal in the table in mid-July. In particular, it proposes a massive competitiveness fund, and about 20% of this competitiveness fund, which means about 115 billion euros, we are over 100 billion euros, would go to defense and space industry. So that's a quite huge amount of money. Of course, it's a massive 5-fold increase that would go then to defense and space, compared to what is today dedicated to defense and space. And because the global EU budget is not increasing, this necessarily means diverting part of this money from other policies. And that aspect of direct money for the arms industry is only the tip of the iceberg, because on top of this dedicated money, you also have civil European budget lines being made accessible to the arms industry. Again, it's a trend which started already in 2017. It's not new, but it's taking an unprecedented step, in particular last week, when the European Parliament agreed to the proposal to open what is called the EU cohesion policy to the arms industry. That means that the arms industry will be able to tip into the huge funds for European regional development, which is a fund of 400 billion euros, will now be open to the arms industry. And that's also a very significant paradigm shift. A second element, which is clear in the title I just mentioned, is the competitiveness angle. Truth is that, again, right from the beginning, those EU policies had as a main objective to boost the global competitiveness of the arms industry, meaning also the export. So that was clear right from the beginning in 2017. But again, we see more of that, especially if you look at the EU white paper on defense of March 2025. It makes it very clear that European rearmament and the arms industry in particular is now presented as the pillar for European competitiveness at large, not only regarding arms, and in particular a pillar to keep Europe in the technological race against China and against the US, which are in that aspect the main competitors of the EU. So to sum up, the narrative today is that the arms industry will save Europe of all threats, from attacks to democracy to climate change, because weapons are presented as prerequisite to security, security being a prerequisite to democracy, to sustainability, and thus to peace. So weapons are presented as ethical, sustainable, and peaceful. Another aspect of this EU vision of competitiveness is, of course, deregulation. On top of the current deregulation process that you may be aware of and which is jeopardizing the EU Green Deal, there is a specific deregulation package proposed for the arms industry with the purpose of, in particular, facilitating and accelerating the grant permits for new plants and new factories, and also facilitate public and private investments. So what does that mean concretely? The Commission is proposing exemptions from a wide range of norms, and in particular environmental norms, such as impact assessments, water and waste management, use of hazardous substances or chemical products. Another aspect of this deregulation is to facilitate the arms sales, because under the argument of facilitating the joint armament projects, there is a push to facilitate further transfers of military goods, so not only weapons, but of course, components, spare parts to be integrated within Europe. This has a very concrete consequences of reducing the capacity of member states to control where their military goods, especially spare parts or components, will end up or will be used. Of course, you need to have the political will, but in that case, even with political will, then there would be a limitation. There is already, and there will be even more a limitation of the capacity to control that. And the other element is also a push factor to further exports outside the EU. First, because there again, national restrictions are presented as obstacles to those cooperation agreements. So there is again a pressure on member states to go to the lowest common denominator when they implement the common rules about where you can or cannot export weapons outside Europe. Second element, push factor, is the significant increase of European production, which is the objective of those rearmament policies. Yet we see that not only EU, but also all European countries continue to purchase mainly US weapon systems. So of course, the question is where to sell our overproduction. That means that exports outside Europe will remain important and even indispensable market for the European arms industry. And we see that still today, with the official figures of 2023, about half of European arms exports go outside Europe. And I mean outside Europe, not only EU, but also non-EU European countries like Ukraine. So they go outside of that. Let's remember that the second worldwide arms exporter is France, and that half of the top 10 arms exporters are European countries in the last 5 years. So my conclusion is that European rearmament policies will largely exacerbate the global arms race, and they will feed conflicts worldwide. Because if weapons are not the root causes of conflicts, they largely favor the military answers to deal with political issues and global challenges. And if we take again a more European perspective, I also think we can say that this hard power, this focus on hard power, is also a way to maintain European economic and political hegemony over part of the world. So I will conclude there, and I think other presentations will complement and go deeper before we can enter into a discussion. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Laëtitia. And again, apologies for that very unpleasant intrusion. We've now disabled all participant contributions, unmuting, opening your cameras and so forth. But if you want to speak during the discussion, then we can invite you to speak and to turn on your camera, possibly. And we've also introduced a waiting room for anyone trying to get in. So our next speaker is Emilie Tricarico, who works at the European Environmental Bureau doing advocacy and communications for REAL, a European Research Council funded project on post-growth transformations. She is a trained ecological economist with master's degrees from the University of Surrey and the University of Leeds in the UK, and has a background in climate and economic transition campaigning. So, Emilie, over to you.
Thank you very much. I will share my screen, so hopefully this works. And I will do presentation mode. Can you see all right?
Yes.
Okay, brilliant. I think I obviously lost my notes, but I should be remembering what I I had planned for this talk. So yes, so thanks for having me. I want to preface this to say that I'm no expert on militarization, but we've started doing work on the topic over the past months, and we hopefully should have a policy brief coming out in November time on the subject. And I also want to say that what I will base my talk on is drawing research from organization doing extensive work on the area. So I've been asked to talk about whether militarization is compatible with action on climate and the green transition. And the short answer is no, but I will add further evidence to this. So in terms of direct climate-related impact from the military, the best estimate is that it contributes to about 5% of total global carbon emissions. And if it were a country, the military would rank fourth in terms of its contribution to CO2 emissions. Important to note is that these emissions are excluded from international climate agreements. Well, they were excluded from the Kyoto Protocol, but then added on a voluntary basis under the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015. And latest NATO targets that have raised defense spending to 5% of GDP would blow our current carbon budget. So the Conflict and Environment Observatoire has estimated that this would add another 200 million tons of CO2 per year, and therefore being incompatible with international cooperation on climate change. From a wider environmental perspective, it's also important to note that conflict and wars have a huge impact on our ecosystems, on water, soil, and air, and these are impacts that have also long-term effects. The war and the genocide, the current genocide in Gaza led by Israel is a prime example of that, with contamination of soil and water, and research has shown that the huge environmental destruction caused in Gaza is fueling a public health crisis that is adding to the extreme suffering of the population there. Military bases and training ground have also caused a lot of environmental impact and pollution, and these sadly also fall disproportionately on marginalized and rural communities who are highly dependent on the natural resources in the area. And the picture above is showing a community successfully resisting a military training base in a UNESCO biosphere reserve in Montenegro. They did this by mobilizing the local population and also gathering international support to their cause. But the current EU militarization strategy that Laëtitia talked about, and together with the defense omnibus, is causing further risk that this type of things will happen, because by a so-called cutting red tape, the omnibus defense would actually impact and bypass key environmental legislation in Europe, such as like the Chemical REACH Directive, the Water Framework Directive, and other key pieces of legislation, environmental legislation. So I also very quickly, hopefully I still have time, wanted to talk about the economic argument that is used to promote this militarization strategy in Europe. And so this falls under the umbrella of military Keynesianism, the idea that increased defense spending would boost aggregate demand in the economy. But this is obviously, this is a false, actually, promise because several research and evidence is showing that defense spending has a poor economic multiplier in comparison with other sectors like the environment, health and education in particular. But also that it is pulling skilled labor away from key sectors like renewable energy and therefore reinforcing our dependence on fossil fuels. The sector is also highly financialized, meaning that the promised trickle down of all this investment into the economy will not happen because the sector, the profits will be concentrated in the shareholder at the top of this industry. And over the past years, the profit gain and the share prices of military firms in the EU and the US have grown exponentially. So we are seeing how this will turn out. But very importantly, those essential public resources will be diverted from key social and environmental priorities. And I think it's important also to show on comparison point between the 3.5% NATO targets, just ring fence for hard defense, which actually is interestingly equates pretty much the same amount of money in the EU that would be needed to plug the green and social investment gap that environmental and social organizations have called for many years. And it would do so, we know that these public resources going channeled towards the military will be done at the expense of social security budgets and environmental and climate action funding. So yeah, I will finish off here to say that we need to move beyond this myopic vision that militarization will save us from economic downfall and security threats. The European project doesn't need more wars, but it needs a true progressive vision that is supporting public funded infrastructure and services and supporting decent living standards for Europeans, but also based on fair and equitable trade partnership with the rest of the world, as well as a massive investment program into social and the green sector. So this is why we need, and at the EB, we are calling for a green progressive industrial policy away from militarization. And I also hope and believe that the environmental movement has a key role to play here and needs to align again with the peace movement and get back to its own roots, where at its start it was clearly aligned with the peace movement. And we do not need, as environmentalists, to be experts in geopolitical strategy nor solving conflicts in the world. But we need to warn about the dangers of militarization for its impact on the environment and on people. And here are a couple of references that I mentioned throughout the talk, and I'd be very happy to be in touch, to be contacted over this topic. So please reach out, and thank you very much for your participation.
Thank you very much, Emilie. And if you want to post any of those links, any of the particularly important ones in the chat, then please do. So our next speaker is Olivier Petitjean, who is a journalist and the coordinator of Observatoire des Multinationales, a corporate watchdog based in Paris. He has published or co-published several investigations on corporate influence in France and at EU level. So, Olivier, off you go.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation. So I'm going to try to share my screen as well. Okay. Oh, I need to change it. Okay, it's okay. Looks like I need to change my parameters, so it's okay. I was just gonna I'm just gonna talk, and I'm gonna put the link of the report I'm gonna talk about mostly, which is a report we've done about 2 years ago. We published in November 2023, which is about we called Blood on the Green Deal. And it was basically around the lobbying that happened at EU level and in member states around the critical raw materials legislation that was adopted in the first month of 2024. So at the time, there was really large political consensus in Europe, especially in Brussels, around, this was a great legislation. Even the Greens, many of the Greens, sorry, the left, the right, the far right, all agreed that, we really need critical raw materials for the energy transition. And so that was a big legitimization of the legislation. We needed minerals to build wind power, solar power, and to build batteries for cars. So we needed more minerals. And there was a little bit about the need for the digital transformation, but the main narrative was about climate. We need to achieve the goals of the Green Deals. We needed more mines, which is both in Europe and outside of Europe, which was really paradoxical because when you know the mining sector, it's a huge source of greenhouse gas emissions directly and indirectly in the way it destroys ecosystems, etc. But that was a narrative that managed to convince a lot of the political spectrum. In the media, you couldn't see very, very few coverage that was critical of this narrative. But there were many reasons. People that know mining and that knew the mining industry and the long-standing needs of the arms industry for metals were, like us, were a bit critical. So we looked basically in that report. I've shared the link for the English version that we published with the Corporate Europe Observatoire at the time. Basically, we looked at the lobbying around this legislation. And of course, there was a lot of lobbying from mining companies, but there was also, that's something people don't necessarily think about when it comes to metals and mining, lobbying from the industrial users of the metals, and key among them were a few industries, and in particular the car industry for batteries and others, and also the defense and aerospace industries, which was very intertwined at Europe level. And we managed to show both that they were very active, very present at all stages of the passing of this legislation, and they managed to have key elements that they wanted and that had been wanting for a long time. So in a way, this whole Green Deal occasion was just an excuse for them to get stuff they had been arguing for 10 years, and it's. What happened at the moment, sorry, with Ukraine and Russia is also in a way an excuse to get things they had been arguing for the past 10, 15 years. So they managed to get really a lot of what they wanted, and particularly they managed to include in that there's a list of critical raw materials. They managed to include many metals that actually, when you look at it, have little, if no, use for the energy transition, even if you include the batteries for cars, etc., but have a lot of use for the arms industry and for the aeronautics industry. So we looked in particular at titanium, aluminium, but there's others that you can mention, like niobium, for instance, that are really critical for the arms industry, but the actual uses for the green energy are really a minimum if they exist at all. So what did they get with that legislation? They got fast tracking of projects, fewer environmental social safeguards. They've got some financial support. I will go back to that in a moment, and also they've got a sort of reorientation of in effect, it's not that was already present, but of the EU trade policy through partnerships with countries, because of course there's a whole discourse about opening new mines in Europe, but most of the metals will actually come from the rest of the world, including Africa, South America, etc. So trade or partnerships agreements with countries like Rwanda, others to secure the metals, and yeah, this sort of thing. So what happened since the passing of the act? So that was a year and a half ago. I would say two things. One of them, on the level of ideas, now the need for the defense argument is much more overt than it was. 2-3 years ago, they didn't really dare to say, "Oh, we need metals for the arms industry." But now they don't feel shy about it, and they're very open about it. The second thing that I've changed is put a few steps, and in particular, they've published 2 lists of critical strategic mining projects that cover both extraction, transformation, recycling, and so one list for projects inside the EU and another list for projects outside the EU, including European countries that are not in the EU. And when you look at the list, there are indeed, and we're in the process of analyzing many of the projects. So we see that some mining projects, especially those, for instance, that are for tungsten, which is really a metal that is used for ammunition, are really not of no use for the energy transition at all, not even for the digital transition, but really for ammunition. So there are a few of those. So it confirms a bit some of the findings we published 2 years ago. And the next step was probably with the omnibus on defense. There is, which is, if I understand well, is still being finalized. The details are being finalized. So there is potential for new. So they're going to fast track defense project, industrial defense projects, and that will likely include new, even more deregulation of mining projects that are of direct interest to the defense industry. So there will be. They think what they got with the critical raw materials legislation was not enough, even too many safeguards, too difficult. So they want even more ease, even more supports to get more metals that they want. So which is, of course, just to conclude, there's many problems with that, but one of them is, of course, more mining, especially outside of Europe, will generate, as we know from experience, more conflicts, more wars, less security overall. And of course, and contributing to accelerating the climate crisis through this sort of project will also create more war and more conflict. So the first problem is we said 2 years ago it's contrary to the objective that you say you have with the Green Deal. Now it hasn't changed, and now we can add it's contrary to the objective you pretend you have in terms of European security, because it will just lead to more rivalries with other blocs, more conflicts in Africa, etc., etc. And the other things we've pointed out, and we are in the course of pointing out when we are analyzing the strategic project at the moment, it's that it's been mentioned before. It's not, who's going to benefit from these policies? Well, it's the mining companies, and many of them in the strategic projects that have been selected are outside the EU or even in tax havens, and it's the industrial companies. And we go back to that argument that actually supporting arm makers and arm exporters is not, does nothing to to make Europe and Europe citizens more secure. So it's also a policy that is heavily tilted towards corporate interests and not the interest of security. And I'm going to finish with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olivier. And our final speaker before we enter the general discussion is Anna Penfrat, who works for the Nonviolent Peaceforce, an international NGO which focuses on the protection of civilians through non-violent means in contexts as different as Sudan, Myanmar, or Ukraine. She is based in Brussels and works to promote peace building and unarmed civilian protection among EU decision makers. So Anna, over to you.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. So I was asked to talk about how EU peace-building policies are affected by EU militarization. So I'll first speak about the impact on EU foreign policy. Then I want to say a few words about the impact on EU peace-building inside the EU. And finally, because all of this will have been a bit depressing, I will try to end with listing a few opportunities. So I'll start with the impact of the EU's current militarization wave on EU foreign policy, and particularly on EU funding and EU political attention for peace building, and also on the EU's internal reputation. So on the funding, you may have heard recent figures from the European Defence Agency. So EU member states have increased their military spending by 19%, and it is just last year, over 12 months. And the increase is continuing, and we're going to reach probably 2.1% of GDP by the end of this year. While, in the meantime, all of the budgets for international solidarity across Europe are being slashed by 20, 30, up to 40%. And that's for budgets that very rarely reach the commitment of 0.7% of the GDP. And not everyone is as transparent as the UK about saying openly that they're decreasing international solidarity funds to spend more on the military, but it is still a continental trend, sadly. Even at the level of the European Commission, where the budgets are more or less fixed for 7 years, there was a recent study from GPPI, it's a German think tank, that showed that even though the needs keep on increasing, EU funding allocated to reduce conflict and fragility is significantly decreasing. So there is also a big risk that this is going to continue under the next EU budget, the next EU 7-year budget, the MFF, Multi-Annual Financial Framework, because the current proposal for a new regulation puts more emphasis on so-called, I put bracket, hard security, and it's much vaguer on peace-building work. So EU funding could, even less EU funding could go to things like mediation efforts, working with communities to support non-violent conflict resolution mechanisms, disarmament or reconciliation initiatives, promoting a culture of non-violence or addressing the root causes of conflicts, etc. So everything that goes under peace building. But about the next EU 7-year budget, happy to dive more in the technicalities in the Q&A if there is interest. I also wanted to raise that this funding issue is directly linked to the issue of EU political attention. So peace building is often viewed by decision makers as something that is quite slow and intangible. So there is often less appetite from EU leaders to discuss and invest in peace building compared with providing military equipment to partner countries, because that is often seen as more short-term visible things that can be shown to taxpayers. But this is a vicious circle because that can also then decrease the space for creative diplomacy. And the last point I wanted to raise on foreign policy is the EU's reputation. So obviously the EU's reputation has been quite tarnished already, with many clear examples of double standards. Everyone's thinking of Gaza, but even before that, the COVID vaccines, for instance. But now, in addition, we now also have some member states who are withdrawing from very important treaties like the Mine Ban Treaty and everything that got mentioned before, obviously, about the massive investment in the arms industry and the risks of global arms race and large proliferation of weapons. So the contrast with the image of the EU as a peace project, as a staunch defender of multilateralism and international law, well, the contrast is increasing and it's not going unnoticed by international partners. But that's it on foreign policy. I wanted to say a few quick words on the impact on peace building and social cohesion within the EU of this militarization wave, because peace building is not just for outside the EU. I mean, all societies need to intentionally invest in building peace to make it sustainable. And obviously the current militarization wave raises lots of questions, like what will be the effect on children growing up in a more militarized society? What room will there be for peace education, for the freedom to join or not military efforts, to criticize our governments? I don't want to sound too dramatic here, but there is a lot to unpack and I have little time. So I just want to use an image that a colleague from Search for Common Ground, another peace-building organization, used in an op-ed in the Brussels Times last week, where they were saying that with the current wave of militarization, we might actually be building a fortress on a fault line, with the risk that it falls on ourselves. But I promised that I would try and finish with some more uplifting opportunities. So here are three. The first one is the next EU budget, the 7-year budget, the multi-annual financial framework. There is still time to influence it and to push for more funds to go to international solidarity, including humanitarian aid and peace building. In the coming year, our MEPs, our members of the European Parliament, the member states, will need to hear from their constituencies that EU citizens actually care about this. However, that's not going to be enough, because globally, what is spent on peace building is peanuts. It's less than 0.5% of what is being spent on military expenditure over the globe, not just for Europe, but over the globe. So we also need to confront the current militarization wave. And that's a pretty daunting task. It's not easy. There are a lot of emotions that are attached to it, a lot of fear, but it will be necessary. And one thing that can be probably interesting for the participants in this call is to ask your decision makers, politicians, civil servants, what or who are they trying to protect actually with the current militarization wave? Some people, a few, I hope only a few will maybe answer very openly that they want to protect the EU's economic superiority or borders only, and that's all. But I think most of them, I hope most of them, would actually respond that they want to protect civilians. And if they do that, that brings a second opportunity, because military deterrence isn't the only way to protect civilians. There are also non-violent, unarmed ways of protecting civilians, and many have been tested and worked in very challenging contexts inside and outside Europe. Shifting the conversation on the protection of civilians is also one way of bringing other aspects of human security. So to talk about climate, to talk about social security systems, something Emilie was bringing up as well, about human rights, about politics of care. So all of these crucial aspects for human security and for sustainable peace. And finally, the third opportunity I want to mention is one for more European humility. It is possible to learn from peace building and protection initiatives in other parts of the world, even though the EU often expects it to be the other way around. And such a change of perspective could be quite transformational. So I dare to hope that something positive can also come out of those opportunities. And I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Anna, and thanks to all of you, Laëtitia, Emilie, Olivier, and Anna, for 4 very interesting presentations. We will go straight now into the discussion, question and answers. We have a bit less time for it than we would have hoped due to the unexpected interruption. So if you have a question or a brief relevant comment, then please use the raise hand function on Zoom, and I will try to call as many of you as possible. And we will, of course, have to... we have Caroline White, so I'm clicked ask to unmute, so hopefully you can speak. Caroline, go ahead.
Sure, thank you very much. And thanks so much to everybody who presented. It was very, very interesting and really informative. I just have a quick question for Anna. If there would be a possibility to share some resources about alternatives where conflict resolution methods for peace building, that would be really helpful. Thanks very much.
Anna, Do you want to just sort of drop some links into
yes,
the chat, maybe?
I'll drop a few in the chat, yes.
Okay, great, thank you. And so any more questions or thoughts? Well, I talked in my introduction about various reports that have come out recently, and one of the ones I mentioned, the Greenpeace Deutschland report on climate change, migration, and conflict. We actually have one, I believe, one of the authors of the report here in the meeting. Ahmad Fawad Divani. So if you would like, Fawad, would you like to say just for those of us who don't read German in particular, for a couple of minutes to say something about this report that you've recently produced?
Hello, Samuel and everyone. So just to clarify, I am not one of the authors of the Greenpeace report, but we commissioned the report to Hamburg University, and two of the professors did the study for us. And in the last 17 years, this is the third study that we are commissioning on the topic of climate change, migration, and conflict. And we discuss the interrelationship of climate change with migration, displacement, and conflict. And this specific study, we mainly focused on conflict. And we discussed that the climate crisis is not only an environmental issue, but it's also a human security threat, and extreme weather events, and also different types of slow onset disasters and fast onset disasters affect people and their livelihoods in different regions. And in the study, we have discussed several case studies focusing mainly in the global south, specifically Southeast Asia, South Asia, Africa. And also we have a couple of studies from Europe as well, and we show how Europe is also lacking preparedness to extreme weather events. And the report also highlights, as our main discussion is going on the wars and conflicts, that the report mentions that the wars and conflicts worsen the climate crisis too, because armed conflicts destroy infrastructure, the ecosystem, pollute land and water, and as mentioned by one of our speakers, that it generates massive emissions, and it leaves scars long after the fighting ends. And in the conclusion, we have mentioned that there is a systematic problem. There is insufficient investment in prevention and mitigation and early warning systems and climate adaptation. And at the same time, there is a lack of international protection law that can protect climate-related displacement. And achieving climate justice requires urgent action from the industrialized nations and the nations which are responsible for the crisis that the countries are experiencing, especially the vulnerable countries which have contributed very less to the emissions. And also we have mentioned that the phasing out fossil fuels, supporting adaptation in the global south, limiting military spending, as we all discussed here, and providing financial compensation to countries which are mostly affected by the actions of the industrialized countries. So I think this is the overall idea of the study that we have. And you have already shared the link with everyone in the chat, and then you can go into details. I talked with Laëtitia, and she only gave me only a few minutes to talk about the study. Therefore, I cannot go more into the details, but you're welcome to read and reach out if there is anything you want to discuss.
Well, thank you very much, Fawad, for very concisely summarising the key points of what's clearly a very in-depth report. I see Antonella Vicintin, if you want to if you have a question or a comment.
2 points. One, I'm really afraid about the centralization of the policy, military policies of the EU, and I'm asking how can we limit it, and in this way, how can we stop rearm? Concretely, what kind of lobby are we able to do? And the other point is about the next conference of the parties of climate change in Brazil. And I'm asking if these issues will be present and ENAAT and the other bodies here are in the position to say and something in that field, in that situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonella. So yes, two questions. How do we stop rearm? Nice little small question. And is this issue likely to come up in any way at COP30? Who wants to respond to that?
If you want, I can start responding about
Sure.
the kind of lobbying or pressure part of it. I mean, at least share a few of my ideas, because there are, of course, I guess, a lot of different ways of doing it. My experience so far, or what I can see, is that one of the key issues is that we need to, if not win, at least to make sure to defend and to enlarge the public debate. Because as Wendela mentioned, it's one of the problems we have is that we are even not listened to, or we are not even really legitimate to participate in a debate. So that's really something that becomes, I bet we are considered as being, naive dreamers when it's good, and if not, we are even considered as being pro-Putin people or something like that. So the first part would be this one, to make sure we maintain a public debate. And for that, there are different things that can be done as individuals. Is first, of course, informing yourself, continuing pushing about those discussions, even if it's more at your local national level. And I will give an example of how this can make differences. It's also about supporting independent media. It's about pushing independent media, or even more mainstream ones, to try and discuss the topic. It's about raising the issue with your banks, if it's possible, in different contexts. In some contexts, in some countries, you have campaigns about don't bank on the bombs, or when you have the capacity in your country to contest the fact that your taxes will be used for such a specific policy. I know it may be possible in some countries or not. So that's the first element. We really need to make sure there is still some debate, because if this debate happens at level of citizens and media, then the debate will also grow at the level of decision makers. I fear that we are just too small compared to the arms industry to work on the other side, like top down and trying to influence decision makers directly through lobbying and more traditional lobbying. We just don't have the means, the resources. I mean, the resources of the arms industry in terms of lobbying is just huge. It's evaluated about 6 million euros every year just in Brussels for the 10 most important ones. So if you compare that with EU peace groups, it's just, of course, we just don't have this capacity. And why I think it still makes a difference, it's taking the example of Italy. There is a massive mobilization in Italy around those questions. And it's not coincidence that in the European Parliament, the only MEPs really committed to that, really trying to change the debate, including within the Greens group, are Italians. Mostly, I mean, most of them, and a few Spanish or whatever, but mostly the core group of an informal peace group of MEPs trying now to discuss that and to really challenge directly EU militarization are from Italy, and it's definitely not a coincidence. So that shows that when you have at national level this mobilization, that really, really helps also at EU level. So that's one of the elements I can share about that.
Thank you, Laëtitia. Rather sobering picture. Emilie, you're actually from a specifically environmental organisation. Will EEB or any other like-minded organisations that you know of be at COP? And do you know if there will be any opportunity to push this question of the climate impact of militarisation and higher military spending?
Yes, thank you. Well, I'm hoping some colleagues will in the movement. We are not necessarily taking part of this negotiation because we work more at the European level. But yeah, it's really important to do so at different levels. And I think some partners and colleagues from the Global South will have also maybe a stronger voice in this as well, because, you know, with the link with the conflicts related to minerals extractions in the country. So I think it's really an important issue to put to the fore. I think also from my presentation, I'm lacking a coordinated environmental movement behind this issue. I think it's wary to have a position on it. Currently, the European Environmental Bureau does not have a position on the current militarization drive. We will have an internal one. We are working on one. It's something difficult because of our different members across Europe. Some are reluctant, actually, to have a stance on it, but we are pushing for this, and also with our work, some of our colleagues work more at the UN level through ENAAT, UNEA, and other process as well. So they also are in touch with humanitarian and peace organizations through this. But yeah, hopefully, I'm really hoping that what Laëtitia was saying, the sort of mobilization, informing, education work that we can do in our respective organization, and I'm hoping that once also we have a position in the EB will be helpful for our members at the national level to take a stance on this.
Thank you, Emilie. And do either of you, Anna or Olivier, want to chime in on either of the two questions posed by Katie?
Yes, maybe
Anna.
just to complement on what Laëtitia was saying, when she was talking about the banks and just making some noise, that made me think of the importance of speaking between different movements and sectors. So for instance, in France, when there was the issue of the banks being able to, in the livret A, so all the words are coming to me in French right now on this, but how some of the money that was deposited in certain types of accounts could maybe be used for the arms industry or not. I first heard about it through the feminist movement, which is not something that I expected. And you can see there a lot of linkages. And I think it's Emilie was talking about better alignment between the peace and the climate movement. I think we really need to share a lot of information. And that's why I was so happy when I saw the lineup for this event, that we were all coming at it from very different angles, but we share a joint messaging, and we definitely need to work better together given the amount of work that we have in front of us.
Thank you, Anna. And I just want to point out the comment from Bram in the chat. Thank you, Bram, who works at the EU Parliament. So if you people want to have a read over that. So I have a question from Olivier. Do you want to add anything to that? And then
well, yeah, not much. Just to say that I do think I agree that the debates at national level and the issues at national level will probably are different in each, can be very different in each traditions, can be very different in each country. And currently in France, there's also, I think there's a lot of work to be done about, disentangling the issue of the need for security, of facing the threats from Russia, etc., which obviously is an argument that's being pushed very heavily, and the interests of the corporate players and their arm makers and exporters, which is a very sensitive issue in France. So that's also aligned, being able to and which is what we're trying to show, who profits from these policies, and it's not us, it's some corporations, and many of them are not even based in Europe. I mean, that's my.
Thank you, Olivier. We are nearly out of time, but I just want to ask to give time for one more quick question, hopefully from Carla. So, Carla, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much to all the speakers. I just wanted to ask a little bit, like, we all know that the master tools will never dismantle the master house. And we know that the war machine touches on critical materials, infrastructure, AI, big companies. So I just wanted to ask, how can we, as a collective against the militarization of life, accelerate the rhythm of our actions so we can change the direction of the future? Because we are talking about things that have impact in life and we need the change now. So how can we change this direction, given that the master tools are everywhere? Even in this call, Zoom is a company that uses AI and is intertwined with many things that we're saying. So how can we accelerate the rhythm to change the direction?
Thank you, Carla. Okay, a quick question and an opportunity to go out, hopefully on a positive note. We all know it's not easy, but one positive thing that our collective can do to sort of try to change the direction. I'll go in reverse order of the speakers. So starting with Anna.
I'm just going to repeat myself, like, try to break it down with all of the people in position of power that you know, by asking them what or who are you actually trying to protect, and start a conversation from there when you can. I think that can be a start. Thanks.
Thank you. Olivier.
Yeah, I would say, trying to build on different movements, like we talked a little about the climate and environmental movements, but also the movements for Gaza and movements for social justice, fiscal justice, which is very important in France. Like I mentioned, the issue of try to connect with our fights to those other movements will be critical. I mean, to be able to break down the sort of the massive narrative that we're being imposed.
Thank you, Olivier. Emilie.
Yes, I think to debunk the military Keynesianism argument, I think is really important, and to show that this will not solve the cost of living crisis, which is the priority of Europeans at the minute. And then do things like was mentioned, of like collaborating across movements for a vision for prosperity beyond militarization is really important.
Thank you, Emilie. And finally, Laëtitia.
Thank you. Oh, God. Well, yeah, it's not an easy question, of course, in a few moments, but I would say first, I would tell those who do not know, who are here in this call, that the peace movement at large tries to gather together in what we call the Stop Rearm Europe campaign. So that's one element also that we realize also, that as peace group, we really also need to work more together. We have no resources and no means, so we all try to do that on top of the rest. So bear with us that we probably are not doing as much as we should, but that's also one way to support. That is to maybe join these movements where you can know more about events, demonstrations, actions at your national level, join other groups. So that's one aspect. And the other one, I would insist on what has been already said, is indeed making the dots with the other sectors, one way or another, according to your own engagement with different topics. So we mentioned feminism, environment groups, and the difficulties they can face. Globally speaking, many sectors, trade unions, for example, may be reluctant to try and directly challenge this militarization. But truth is that we are all going to be victims of it. Even within the trade unions, in most recent events, you can see that they really realize we do have to work on that, because it's a trap pretending that he's going to save jobs, for example. And in the long term, it's really a trap. So that would help a lot, because once the topic will be taken on board by different sectors, showing how this is a danger for everybody and for citizens from all the different perspectives, that will make a major difference to influence the debate and then oblige and put the pressure on decision makers.
Thank you, Laëtitia. So we've come to the end of our time. Thank you very much to all four of our speakers, to Vendela for hosting, to all of you for coming. But meanwhile, I hope we've all heard, despite that, a lot of very interesting food for thought, and even some inspiration for how we can take things forward in what's overall a fairly grim picture. But thank you again very much, all of you, for coming. And bye for now.
Thank you very much.